and frankly, kind of go through it at kind of high speed here. This is an excerpt from the course, brand new course. We're actually really excited to release that. But one of the most important things when we're doing any sort of vulnerability assessment is we have to understand what we have. It's literally critical controls 1 and 2. Understanding what hardware we have and understanding what software is in place. Because it's so key, the bad guys oftentimes will win because they find the systems that we've forgotten about, the system that doesn't receive the patches, the system that doesn't get the hardening, that extra service that we forgot was even installed in the first place. So it's really important to build that inventory if we don't have it, and then, like I said, find some of those additional systems that we may not know that are out there. And there's a number of different ways that we can identify these systems, a number of different pieces that we're looking for as well. So it's not just the IP address that we're looking for, especially when it comes to web. We'll talk about web here in a little bit, but finding the IPs of the systems is important, but also we need to understand a lot more than that. Like, for example, what operating systems is used, and probably maybe the most important is what software is in use. There are oftentimes multiple pieces of software running on a particular system, and they oftentimes don't get the same level of patching and the same level of hardening as we get for the operating systems. So that is going to be very key to us. Also, we need to understand what are some of the accessible ports, especially if it's going to be an external-facing system. Maybe we're going to be focusing on the users here as well. The key here, it's going to be really important that we get the big threat. Unlike pen testing and red teaming, where we're going to go for more depth, we need to find a lot of these extra systems. The nice thing is if you're an internal group, you have more time. Whereas if you're maybe an external person doing a vulnerability assessment or discovery or a consultant of some kind, we're oftentimes much more limited by time. That's one thing that's to a significant advantage of those internal teams, is that they have that benefit of time on their side, so they can run much more thorough scans. And they can also monitor over time, so they can see if systems come online, if new ports or services show up in the environment. We've got a number of different ways where we can do discovery. There's sort of 3 kind of primary ways that we're going to discuss here briefly. First off is passive. So we're not going to be sending any sort of traffic to the target system. It's nice because frankly, it's very quiet. We're not going to be hitting the systems. There's not a chance of us hitting a system too hard, port scanning it, causing it to go offline. On the opposite end, we have active scanning, where we're going to be sending live traffic to the system. Oftentimes, this is in the form of port scans. And there are some systems that don't like those port scans. They don't like being hit really loud and hard. And then we've got sort of an in-between sort of, where we might just go to commonly accessible ports and services. Think of maybe a bad guy doing reconnaissance against your organization without the port scan, just quickly clicking around the website, understanding the software that's in use and maybe the layout of the land a little bit. So the key here for the first portion of our discovery is going to be our passive discovery, right? This is where we don't interact with the target systems. The key here, again, is that the internal teams have a significant advantage here over any sort of external teams or the attackers. They've got the home field advantage, if you will. They can look at their networking gear, and we'll take a look at some of these systems in different ways where we can maybe find systems we've forgotten about without actually doing any sort of port scans or sweeps inside of our network. Kind of the key here is to understand a little bit about the OSI model. Laid out here, as we see on the right, and the very bottom, of course, we've got the electrical, right, the physical aspect. The data link layer, this is where our MAC addresses are. Layer 3, we've got IPv4 and IPv6, and layer 4, UDP and TCP. Typically, our scanning is going to focus on layers 3 and layers 4. Sometimes a little bit of layers 2, but that's going to be our key when it comes to discovery. When we actually do some of the passive, we actually can take advantage a little bit of the data link layer. So with our switches contain a mapping between the MAC addresses and the ports and VLANs that are on that particular switch. And if it's talking on the network at all, the switch will know about it. So this is a definite advantage to the defenders, because what they could do is they can ask these switches, this networking equipment, and say, hey, who do you know about? Who's in your CAM table? And that CAM table is that mapping between the ports and VLAN and the underlying MAC address. And again, if it's on the network, it's going to be in this CAM table. So we can grab this information in a number of different ways. You could talk to the networking team. We could use like show CAM dynamic and get a list of information this way. That's probably not going to be the most efficient way for most people to run the commands and then sort of parse the output. We can also get that information in some other ways, which we'll see here in just a little bit. We're also at our layer 3 devices, we're going to have the MAC address to IP address mapping. So if a device wants to make any sort of forwarding decisions, we have to understand the IP and the MAC address. So this is going to be the router for the subnet. So our default gateway, for example, it's going to have the MAC address to IP address mapping. If we can extract that information, we can get both the MAC address, which should uniquely identify the system, as well as the IP address, which is going to allow us to access it off the subnet. Ways we can get this information, as well as the CAM table that we talked about, is with SNMP. SNMP is the simple network managing protocol. I sort of joke that the S is a lie. It is not quite so simple. But what we can do is we can extract a large quantity of data from these systems, and there are tools that will parse it. Now, here we have some sort of the command line way of chopping up the particular output from here, from our SNMP walk, to get the IP addresses. What we could do is there are some other tools as well where we can get that IP address and the MAC address mapping. Then we can tie it back to a particular device, and then we have an understanding of both a unique system by MAC address, as well as some of the IP addresses in our network. And the nice thing is, too, is this is not going to be dependent on, maybe let's say I've got a scanner someplace and I'm trying to scan my internal network. This isn't going to be hampered by our firewall, right? If we have access to the switch or that router, we can extract this information, and it's very, very, very reliable. So the nice thing is with this is it is extremely reliable. If it's talking on the network, we will know about it. Now the negatives here are, well, we have to have access to the networking gear. As an external person, maybe a third party, or if you're an internal team and you're from a business unit to business unit, maybe you won't have the access to access those the networking equipment and extract this information. And if you're a third party, this is quite unlikely. So while it is very, very reliable, there are some drawbacks here as well. Other ways we could get information. So we could look at proxy logs. So if you are doing security, you should be proxying all the traffic that leaves your organization. You should be inspecting the traffic where you can to see what systems are talking where, so that you can identify any sort of malware being delivered to maybe some of your clients, even if it's an encrypted tunnel. Also, we would like to identify data as it's leaving the organization. So think of this situation where someone has compromised our network and they are now exfiltrating the data. We need those proxy logs in place to protect us both from the compromise as well as to detect the breach afterwards and the exfiltration of data. So if you've got those logs, what we could do is we can identify systems that are talking out to the cloud. So I can find, well, all the systems that have our internet access. This is good because, frankly, most systems are going to talk to the cloud in some way or another. Now, realistically, not all systems should have internet access. There is really no reason that your domain controller should be talking to the internet. There is really no reason that your SQL server should be talking to the internet. Unfortunately, we see this all the time where these types of systems have internet access. And I can't tell you how many times when I've done like pen testing or red teaming, where I've used these as pivots into the organization because they have that external access, and because I can quickly and relatively easily exfiltrate the data from those systems. Other potential issues here is, well, proxy is great, but it's mostly designed for HTTP and HTTPS. We're going to miss some of the other protocols unless we get more specific proxies set up. But these are the HTTP, HTTPS is by far the most common. What else can we look at? Your networking team probably already has flow data. Flow data, what it does is it tracks some of the basics of the communication between hosts. So we can see that host A has talked to a server somewhere in, I don't know, let's just pick the, Iran, I guess. We'll throw them under the bus. But we can see that these systems talked and how much data was transmitted and for how long. And a lot of this data is probably already tracked by your networking team. The networking teams like to have this data so they can track, who's talking to whom. What does the latency look like? What is our throughput and our bandwidth? So you could talk to the networking teams, and maybe we can get access to this and find the hosts that are talking to the internet. And the nice thing here is this might work. This is going to work for protocols other than HTTP and HTTPS. And there's a number of user interfaces that are available to us. We've got things like NTOP. Here's an example of using NTOP, and we can see the data sent back and forth. This is both really handy for an incident responder, but also they can help us as someone who's doing an internal vulnerability assessment. We can identify the hosts, because if they're talking out to the internet, we know that they're going to be live. Right? Benefits, again, we find systems that are talking to the internet. And any sort of end user system will be in the log, but oftentimes some systems won't. Again, not all systems should have internet access. If all of your systems have internet access, I mean, that's probably not a good thing, but at least on the good side, sort of in a way, is it'll show up in your proxy logs, right? Or sorry, in your typo here, it's going to show up in your flow data. All right. Now, IP addresses are important. But when it comes to web servers, that's simply not enough. Identifying a web server by IP address is only part of the story. I can have multiple websites on the same IP address, and if we don't hit the server in the right way with the correct host header, we're going to miss a site, which means a bad guy might be able to hit the site, and we've forgotten it's there. We've forgotten patches to it. So here's an example. I went to AmericanAirlines.com on the left, and I used the proper host header here, www.aa.com, and we can access the page. However, if I was scanning it, I just came across the IP address, and I accessed it by the IP address, the server's going to say, I don't know what to do here. Or it might just give you one site, and it might have multiple sites. So if we take a look at some of the configurations off to the right here, this is a snippet from an Apache configuration file. We can provide two different host headers to this particular host and get different information. So if I go to this site with www.SEC460.com, I'm going to be presented with one website. However, if I go to that exact same server but use webmail.com, I'm going to hit a different web server. I'm going to hit different code. And as we mentioned, it's important to identify all the software that's in use within the organization. So that IP address is simply not going to be enough. Again, another nice thing here for our internal teams is they have access to the server. They can easily look at these configuration files. So we could write a script to grab the Apache configuration files from all of our servers and then parse it a little bit, and we can find those additional host headers. With IIS, we can use PowerShell. So I can use PowerShell. I have to load an additional module here. This is going to load commandlets that are going to allow me to interrogate IIS. So you can see here, for example, we say import module web administration. We get a new command that's called get website. I can now run that get website, and I can see the various bindings. So in our example here, we have the default website. So if I just go to this system by IP address, that's the only web server I'm going to see, the only website, only web application. Once we use get website, we can take a look at the bindings and we see, oh look, hey, here's this web2.sec460.com. And we find, again, additional software, additional code. It's important that we understand what do we have inside the environment. We can't patch code that we don't know exists. We could also use similar commandlets to extract this information from Windows host with PowerShell. So we can use get content. So get content or apache.conf. Oh man, that's another typo. Darn it. So we can use get content. Get content is going to display the contents of our file. So I'm going to use get content in our http.conf, C-O-N-F. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the select alias commandlet, which is a lot like grep. It's going to filter the output. And what we're looking for is any lines that contain server name or server alias. So I can quickly look through my http.conf and I can find www.sec460.com. Sec460.com without a prefix, as well as webmail. Nginx, of course, the configuration file for Nginx. By the way, a little bit of trivia. Number one web server on the face of the planet is Apache, and number 2 is Nginx. Third then is going to be IIS. So Nginx, still very common. Of course, the configuration file is going to be very different. So I can use my get content, look at the configuration file, and this time we're going to look for server underscore name. And it puts both the name and the alias on the same line. So we can see on the first line of output we have sec460.com as well as www.sec460.com. And then we can also see webmail.sec460.com. For our Linux people, here is here are the commands. I almost said commandlets. Commandlets are for PowerShell, not Bash. Here are the commands to extract the same information from Apache on Linux. So we're going to use grep here to look at our http.conf. Apparently, I'm in love with M's. I see. Then I can use the -e option twice to use 2 different expressions. So the first is going to give me my www, then I get one without a prefix, then my webmail. And again, similar for Nginx. I'm going to say grep server underscore name, and then give it the path to my Nginx configuration file. Benefits here. This is fast. It's safe. We get good quality names. That is key, especially when it comes to the website. We need those quality names so that we can identify the services and the websites that are available. That IP address is oftentimes not going to be enough for us. Limitations, of course, similar to what we saw before, we do have to have command line access. Now we could do, on Linux side, we could do SSH. On the Windows side, we can use something like PowerShell remoting to do a lot of this automation for us. But it does require a little bit of extra work. The scripting, though, is not terribly difficult, as we saw. Other ways we can extract this information. Well, we could use good old DNS. So we could ask the DNS server for, www. Now I'm a nerd. I like me some board games. So we're using Board Game Geek here in our example. So I could say, hey, where is www.boardgamegeek? Does it exist? If so, what is the IP address? What I could do, though, instead of just trying and sort of finger bashing this out, is I could try a large number of additional names with a tool like Nmap. So I could use Nmap with a DNS brute forcing script to brute force a number of these prefixes. And Nmap actually comes with 2 different lists. So there's a default list, which is a little bit shorter, and then there's a bigger list. What I like even better, though, than Nmap is I like DNS Recon. DNS Recon does a lot of different things. So it tries zone transfers. It tries to get MX records and NS records, so different types of records. It finds IP addresses and then tries to do a reverse lookup on those IP addresses, and then it uses a little bit bigger dictionary. So we can see here off to the right, I ran this against a public website, and here's what we saw. I saw ads, we saw images, news servers, local, we found a download server, an OWA, that's kind of fun. Beta, ooh, I like beta. I'm sure the bad guys like the beta servers too, right? Those are the systems that are often not well hardened and not well patched. And we can see a number of different things in here. Oh, Git, I always like Git. Maybe I can pull some, maybe the bad guy can pull some source code. It's important to identify that and see if there are any sort of issues there. All right, so I guess I went through this a little bit quicker than I intended to. That's good, you know, give you the rest of some of the day back here. Before we wrap up, any questions from any of you guys? And as we sort of roll out here, again, just a reminder, if you're interested in some more of this, we go into this a little bit more depth in the course. We also have a number of labs related to this as well. But if you don't have any questions, we'd love to see you in Sydney and Singapore in a month, a little over a month. So very cool. Any questions? I don't see any questions yet. Ruby, any questions?
Just about the slides and the presentation is going to be archived. If no one else has any questions, then we'll finish up here. But you can always email us at asiapacific@sans.org. If you have a question for Tim, we'll pass it along.
Oh, there's one question. Let me cut you off. Sorry.
Yeah.
Somebody was asking, are there any prerequisites for this course? You need some of the fundamentals of security. So you know, maybe 401, but if you feel like you've got that pretty well down, we do try to keep this pretty introductory. We're not going to go into writing our own tests in you know, Nessus or writing our own custom Nmap scripts. We do try to keep it, you know, relatively introductory and to reach a much broader audience. Oh, great! You just passed forward. Well, congratulations, Alex. Great. Any more questions? So the question was, what about using CM? Do you mean CMD or CMDB? Is that a typo, Sim? Well, I think that's going to wrap up. If you feel like it, feel free to send me an email if you have any questions about the course. We've got asiapacific@sans.org down here at the bottom. If you're interested in the course, if you have any questions about any of the technical content, feel free to reach out to me. Tim@redsiege.com. That's Tim@redsiege.com, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have related to the course. But with that, I wish you a good rest of the day, and hopefully we'll see you in Asia Pacific in the next couple of months.